What's up guys, Josh here, and you're watching Chimp Skills. And today I want to talk about a book that I read by Josh Waitzkin. So the book is called The Art of Learning. Now I first came across Josh Waitzkin in a Tim Ferriss interview that he did on Tim's podcast. And the guy is an absolute genius. Really well educated in regards to life. He's a chess sort of prodigy. The movie Searching for Bobby Fischer was based on him. He's also a push hands, basically the martial art that sort of works around Tai Chi, world champion. And he's also Marcelo Garcia's first black belt and helped Marcelo Garcia launch his online resource, which is MG in Action. So, the guy is real sort of philosophical background, but yeah, super intelligent. I found his book, it's pretty hard to grasp, to explain to other people. You can understand it when you're reading it, but to be able to then communicate it afterwards, I found to be quite difficult. And his podcasts are probably a little bit easier to follow because he's able to explain things in depth and really go into it. Yeah, I've split this segment into two parts. I've only read the first half of the book thus far because it was just too much to take on board in one hit. So throughout the book, he talks about basically his experience as he's growing up playing chess. And he uses that as a vehicle to explain his learnings. And then he also progresses into sticky hands, I think it's called sticky hands, which is basically, or push hands, which is like a martial art that sort of revolves around Tai Chi. So, in other books, you could probably break things down into certain techniques or fundamentals, where his sort of philosophy and the way he teaches seems to be all around, philosophical learnings that are not too easy to sort of find examples. That's why I find it's sort of shades of grey. So I'll go through a bunch of sort of concepts that I found to be really interesting throughout the book thus far, and give a brief explanation and how that sort of applies to sort of everyday life. So the first concept he talks about is soft focus. So with his whole philosophy, it's around flow state, and he talks about the way that he likes to play chess. There are some players that like to play really structured, sort of controlled, positional sort of game, where he likes basically to be a lot of transitions, to be a lot of chaos, and that's where he thrives. And he talks about this soft focus is that where you can get into essentially the flow state where you're comfortable wherever the game goes. You're not going to have any resistance to that. Your mind's going to be able to adapt. You're going to be present in that particular moment. And there's a little cool quote or a little excerpt out of the book that I've got that's on soft focus, and it's like the soft zone, it does not base success on a submissive world or overpowering force, but on intelligent preparation and cultivated resilience. So the whole book's a whole bunch of riddles. But he talks about also with the high performers, with this soft zone and the way that they're thinking, they are really focused, but they're adaptable. So if, for instance, their plans don't work out, then they're able to quickly make changes and adjust. And he talks about that sort of one of the real, characteristics of when you are in that flow state, that you're just present in that exact moment. And if it shifts, then you're able to adapt straight away. One of the other philosophies that he talks about is the downward spiral. And this is where it gets a little bit more relatable for everyday life. So he talks about that he had experiences where if he was, for instance, made a bad move in chess and he focused on that bad move and then reacted afterwards, almost out of anger, then he found that it was really hard to sort of shake himself out of that particular mindset. And he uses an example that when he actually teaches his students, when he's later on in life, as he's sort of getting to his early 20s, when he becomes a coach as well. And he talks about a scenario where a woman in New York City was crossing the road. She's got her earphones on, she's not really paying attention, and she looks the wrong way to cross the road. And she nearly gets hit by a cyclist. So he said it was kind of like this, chaos that was just functioning, the bike was zipping around the car, this lady sort of steps out in front of the bike, and the bike dodges her. And instead of feeling grateful that the bike didn't hit her because, she wasn't paying attention to which way the cars were going, she turns around to sort of yell at the cyclist, to go off at him. And it's only at that stage that she's taken her eyes completely off the road and she actually gets hit by a cab. So that's his example that he uses for teaching to avoiding the downward spiral. So if, say for instance, you have something that you make a poor decision don't react out of that, don't get caught up in that emotion. You need to break at that point. And he talks about certain techniques like basically physiologically flushing the body. So whether it's you stop and you take a few deep breaths, you splash some cold water on your face, you go outside and you do a couple of 50-meter dashes. It's just a matter of changing your physiological state to break that downward spiral. And if you're able to do that, he then talks about the times where he was actually able to break out of that downward spiral and win some games that he previously would have lost. So that's a pretty transferable sort of example. The other one is he talks about the child mind and how, say for instance, he uses the analogy of a child on a balancing beam. And say for instance, they might be trying to do flips off it, balance or what have you. The child falls over, they get back up and they go again. And he talks about the shift from the child brain to the adult brain. And as adults, we'd be looking at, if I go on that balancing beam and I do a flip, I could injure myself, and that sort of avoidance. And he talks about this crossover in many kinds of calculated risks that we may take later in life, is that we become, basically from reading between the lines, more risk averse, and that we should embrace some of that childlike, creativity and perseverance, and that risk-taking aspect in order to pursue excellence. Or, if you're thinking about the business world, it might be innovation or just basically getting ahead, that we probably hinder ourselves too much with fear, and go back to that childlike mind of being more experimental and taking a few more risks. And that's when he also talks about, when you're talking about this, the success of a conscious high performer and how they're comfortable. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about, the soft zone, that they are comfortable with things as they move around and they're able to adapt. And there's a really cool little excerpt here that I've got that's about the conscious high performer. Okay, I believe that one of the most critical factors in the transition to becoming a conscious high performer is the degree to which your relationship to your pursuit stays in harmony with your unique disposition. There will inevitably be times when we need to try new ideas, release our current knowledge to take in new information, but it is critical to integrate this new information in a manner that does not violate who we are. So he talks about a time in his chess career where he had this, his sort of style was this sort of chaotic, free-flowing sort of, chaotic, I don't know what other way to describe it, really free-flowing, and there's a lot of variables. And he gets this chess coach who is a really high performer. He's a Russian guy, and he believes in playing sort of like a really strategic, positional kind of game. And what he found is when he was being coached by this guy, he would be thinking about the moves and whether his coach would approve of these kind of moves. And so during this process, he finds over 6 months to a year, he starts to lose a lot more. And what he realizes is he kind of loses a sense of himself. He loses that inner compass. And that's what he's sort of referring to, that conscious high performer, is that they trust their intuition to a stage where, they've seen how the game sort of evolves over years, they've seen the repetitions, and that the true conscious high performers are able to trust their intuition on, and just have that instinct to be able to follow it. So I guess that crosses over to things like business, all kind of athletic endeavors and things like that. But I thought that was really interesting, where he talks about, well, you're better off sometimes just going with your own direction. You can take advice from others, but don't let that actually control and take over your sense of self. And the last thing that I'll finish up on is he talks about investing in the loss. So this refers to his experience with push hands. So like I mentioned, it's kind of like a Tai Chi, kind of like martial arts. And he talks about how the philosophy with that is that, so you're going against each other with your hands. I have to watch a YouTube video to fully understand it. But basically, instead of resisting someone else's force, you're relaxing and you're going with it. So what he talks about is that at the beginning, it was really hard for him to not resist against the other person, because, they would apply force to him. Naturally, he wants to apply force back. So basically, he talks about getting beaten up for a while, but over time, learning to not push back and sort of surrendering to the technique. That's where he talks about that even though you're going to lose for a while, that's an investment in your future sort of progression. And he references a particular sort of bigger guy that goes with him quite regularly in training, and over the period of sort of, a year when they've been training together, instead of him getting his ass kicked, he starts to turn the table on this guy and, you know, is putting him on his butt quite regularly in training to the stage where the guy doesn't train with him anymore. So yeah, surrendering to the technique, even though there might be a short-term loss, there's a long-term gain. So that's sort of that philosophy around investing in the loss. So look guys, yeah, there's a fair bit in it. If you want to check the book out, it's The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. It is a good read. If you haven't got the time to read the book, I definitely recommend checking out his podcast with Tim Ferriss. He's done 2 of them now and it's brilliant. But yeah, I hope you liked the video. Give it a share if you did. And I'll be back next time with part 2. Until then, peace.